But therein lies the critical observation. And I'd like to illustrate that by pointing out that even if we have resonant relationships in our leadership or managerial positions, that one of the things that happens is over time, the buildup of the stress gets to us and we start to experience what we call the sacrifice syndrome. You know what that's like. You get to the end of Friday evening and you're starting to go home and you feel like someone sucked the blood out from you and you can barely make it to your bar at home and pour yourself a drink, or if you don't use alcohol, make some strong tea. The problem is the sacrifice syndrome, as I was saying, leads to cognitive, perceptual, and emotional impairment, and you are not sustainable in your leadership. So no matter how effective you have been, you are less. Well, the only antidote discovered to date in medical research is the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. If you will, we're calling the renewal cycle. So it is the daily dosage of renewal in balance with the sacrifice syndrome of the chronic stress that allows us to build up our capabilities, to rebuild. Medical research and psychological research has helped us to understand that there are a number of experiences that invoke the parasympathetic nervous system, the renewal process. For example, under mindfulness, we know that meditating helps produce this. There have been many research studies over 30 years showing this. For example, although people say meditating 15 to 20 minutes 3 times a week, once a day helps, most people, when they learn to meditate, are taught that you should be meditating twice a day. 2 studies have shown the power of yoga to produce this. 2 studies have shown the power of Tai Chi. My guess is other forms of martial arts do it if it's the centering parts of the martial art, not the kick-ass parts. I think they probably activate the sympathetic nervous system. Prayer. 2 studies have shown that when we pray, if we're praying to a loving God, that was the interesting twist. If you pray to a loving God, it activates the renewal system. If you pray to a vengeful God, it actually activates the stress response. And I think I do a lot of work in Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur and Istanbul and sometimes in Bahrain. And my Islamic friends have it all over the rest of us in the Judeo-Christian tradition, because if you pause 3, most executives and professionals make it to 3 prayers a day, not the full 5. That's 3 times a day you're pausing, centering yourself, and engaging with a loving God. And by the way, most of the Judeo-Christian sects do ask you to pray twice a day, but we forget that very often. So mindfulness practices do seem to have a profound effect, both in terms of the research and in terms of popular thought. Another thing that has a huge impact is compassion. Being in a loving relationship is very powerful as it stimulates renewal. Having pets, especially pets that you can stroke, dogs, cats, horses, monkeys, doesn't work with fish. Sorry, folks. Because it looks like it is in the stroking of the pet that you are building this sympathetic emotional bond that engages in renewal. Volunteering and doing things for people who are less fortunate than you helps. Caregiving helps. One caveat here. There is something that has been identified in elderly caregivers, social workers, and nurses in particular, where those occupations where compassion is drawn upon so much that they actually go into compassion fatigue, which is a syndrome that leads to stress. My wife, who was at elementary school, kindergarten school teacher for over 20 years, I mean, she made the observation to me very often that when we would have dinner or get-togethers with a lot of her elementary school friends, it was interesting that they didn't have that many children, if any. And some of it might have been the compassion fatigue of what happens when you're around little children and giving your all to them all day. I just wanted to mention that as a caveat, because compassion usually helps, but you can overload. Feeling hopeful about the future activates the parasympathetic nervous system renewal process. And although in our 2005 book, Resonant Leadership, we didn't go into it, Annemike and I just focused on mindfulness, hope, and compassion. In the last 3 years, the research has come out that I think is pretty convincing that laughter, joy, and playfulness also stimulates the renewal process in the human body. So one of the things that this says to us is it is hopeful. It is a hopeful message that yes, despite the amount of stress that we're under, unintentional or intentional, we can ameliorate it or the ravages of it by practicing certain things each day. Now, the dosage ends up being critical because you can't wait till the weekend and kind of try to binge rest for a couple of reasons. One, rest isn't the same as renewal. Your body needs rest, but that's not the same as renewal. Secondly, if you worked 2 or 3, 60, 80 hours a week, or you're working multiple jobs, and all of a sudden you get 2 days off, that is not going to make up for 3 weeks of what you've done to your body and mind. So one of the hopeful things, though, is that we do know what you can do on a daily basis. I've listed some of the things you can do at home. In another module, we'll be talking about a number of the things you can be doing at work to make this invoked and more effective. Second interesting, if not very hopeful observation, is that the same experiences that helped us, as we talked about in the earlier module, build our resonant, our more effective relationships, are the experiences that help us to build renewal into our bodies and minds. So, yes, chronic stress is the devil. In this case, it is the thing that causes us to slide into dissonant relationships, to disengage with people we care about, with our friends, with our colleagues, with our natural environment, with our faith. Chronic stress is something that ends up making us less than who we are and who we could be. I would like to ask you to consider, as a personal learning assignment coming out of this module, to keep a diary. And you really should do this each day. Don't wait till several days later and do it. But at the end of each day, go back, write down the hour that you woke up, and go all the way through to the hour you're about to go to bed, and write down things that happened during each hour that were stressful, annoying stressful, or things that happened each hour that were renewing. In other words, were you interacting with people who are a pain? Were you dealing with something really annoying? Were you dealing with something positive, really problematic? Versus were you dealing with something that was fun, engaging, positive, hopeful, compassionate? Keep track each day in kind of a log or journal. And at the end of a week, look at it. And then at the end of 2 weeks, sit back and take a longer look and ask yourself, what could you do differently each day to reverse that balance? Because you're the one who makes the decision each day. In the next module, we'll be going into a number of the things you could be doing at work to invoke this renewal process. Thank you.